Welcome to Pete's Property Podcast, brought to you by Buyers and hosted by Pete Wargent, buyer's agent, finance and real estate expert, and all-round property guru, plus published author. Join Pete for 30 minutes as he chats all things property with a new guest each week. Learn practical tips from the movers and shakers in the property industry and well-known personalities sharing their property journeys.
G'day, welcome to this week's episode of the Pete Wargent Property Pod. I'm thrilled today to have a very special guest and friend, Hayden West, property investor and one-time chippy as well, as we'll learn as we go through. Hayden, welcome. It's great to have you on.
Thanks, mate. It's great to be here.
And a fellow Queenslander as well. So first up, tell us a bit about your background. Are you from Queensland originally, and where did you grow up?
I grew up all over the place, mate. I was originally born in Victoria, moved around a lot when we were kids with Dad's job. He was in supermarkets and things like that. So whenever he'd get a promotion or anything like that, we'd sort of have to move schools and all that sort of stuff pretty regularly. So, yeah, we lived in Victoria 2 or 3 times, Queensland 3 or 4 times, South Australia when I was very, very little. Can't remember it, but apparently I was there. Pretty big opening of where we grew up, but in the last sort of 15 to 20 years, we've been Queensland-based, mate, so it was all done when I was pretty young.
Yeah, well, you're in good company because half of Queensland seems to be populated by Victorians at the moment, certainly southeast Queensland. And so did that involve changing schools as you grew up because of your old man moving around?
Yeah, definitely. I think I had probably 4, maybe 5 primary schools. Luckily enough, I had only 2 high schools. So first year of high school was done in Victoria and then basically finished my schooling up in Queensland. I did drop out at the end of year 11, so can't really say I exactly finished.
Yeah, I had a similar experience myself, a couple of different high schools and likewise for primary schools. I think it gets harder as you get older because you're going through your difficult teenage years as it is, and then you've got to change with your peer group and your studies and things like that. It's a difficult time. Certainly I found it difficult. So you've gone on to be a very successful property investor, as we'll come on to. But tell us a bit about your early career first. What did you do when you finished education, and why did you choose the career you did?
Mate, basically, I'd always been into building something when I was little. So whether it was with boxes or bits of timber or whatever it was, I'd always enjoyed creating stuff. I loved doing woodwork at school and metalwork. I wasn't terrible at school, but I definitely didn't put in the effort to succeed at school either, you know. So I did enough to not get in trouble at home with the grades. As long as I was passing, Mum and Dad were pretty happy. But at the end of year 11, just sort of completely lost interest in school, had the conversation with Mum and Dad, and basically they said, if you want to leave school, you've got to get a full-time job. So I think it was about 3 weeks later, over the school holidays at Christmas, I said, I've got a job and I'm not going back for year 12. So first, originally it was into a truss factory in Brendale, building frames and trusses and things like that. But basically that was just until I got my licence sorted at the age of 17, got an apprenticeship as a carpenter.
Yeah, it's a pretty good career to have chosen. I guess sparkies and carpenters are very rarely out of work or short of work in Australia with the sort of rampant population growth we've had over the past 15 or 20 years. Huge amount of construction going on, and especially in southeast Queensland, there's just always work for trades and tradesmen in those type of careers. So obviously it was a well-chosen career. Does that, out of interest, does that career as a carpenter, has that helped you with your property investing, or has it not really come into it?
I think it has in a way that I can sort of do my own building and pest inspections at an initial inspection, you know, so I still sort of get a pestie to come in and have a look over the place just for termites and things like that if they're in any of the architraves. But you know, when you're there, it's good to be able to look out for the signs of movement and, cracks and things like that in properties, potential issues like water leaks, gutters, handrails, decking, anything like that that sort of needs work, I can pretty quickly identify it. So that's definitely helped for that. As far as renovating, I haven't really done any of it myself on my investment properties. Too busy with work, mate. So I'll try and keep my investing very, very separate. I don't want to do too much on it. I'll do a bit of paint and carpet and things like that, but I don't want to have to spend my weekends and weeks, working on my investments.
Yeah, I do understand that. It's interesting, because I often say to people, or I have said in the past, that if I had my time again, I'd probably not go to university and take the career I did as a chartered accountant. I would probably just get an apprenticeship and as a builder and use those skills directly in real estate. But I guess the thing is, to a certain degree, there's not really much value in saying, well, what if I'd done X, Y, Z? Because I've had a lot of benefits from my career as accountant, not least because it gave me the salary to help build the property portfolio, but also a whole range of sort of business skills you wouldn't necessarily pick up in a trade position unless you started your own business like you did. But also, I guess you could also say, well, all the sequences would have changed, wouldn't have met my now wife, and so who really knows how things might have played out. Now, you went on to actually build your own business as a carpenter. What age did you do that, and what have been the challenges and the good and bad parts to running your own show?
So I started my own business when I was pretty young. I was 21.
Wow.
So basically finished my apprenticeship, did it with my whole apprenticeship with one builder, a small builder not far from where we were living, and then sort of did 2 years subcontracting with him, on and off. Whenever he'd sort of get a big job or whatever, we'd always be there to help him out. But in the meantime, I was sort of building a little business on the side, doing some real estate maintenance and things like that. So as he got older and started looking for retirement, obviously I had to find something else to do. And it was hard because when you've only done your apprenticeship with, a more senior builder later in their career, they're not looking to make new contacts or anything like that. And they have their tradies and, everyone on site knows each other. But it also meant that I didn't get to make a lot of contacts through the work I was doing either because, everyone on the site was always the same people. So it was quite hard to start up initially. I think my first year I turned over about 40 grand. So not a lot.
Yeah, but I've always really have great admiration for people who have the balls to go out and do these things on their own at such a young age. So for one of my university housemates didn't finish his degree, just went out and started his own business designing websites, and I think he was 20 years old or something. It took me until 33 before I finally sort of had the nerve to quit my full-time job. And I think, by that stage, I was quite well set financially. I just didn't have the stomach to take the leap and actually go and do my own thing. Not really a natural born entrepreneur. I guess this is one of the big questions facing young people today as they leave school, because traditionally a lot of people thought to go to higher education and university. But one of the challenges these days is you could spend 3 or 4 years at uni building up a whole a huge amount of HEX debt, which you have to pay back at some point, by which stage, as you've shown, people could already have got a trade for themselves and actually gone out on their own and started sort of getting ahead while you're racking up student debt. So it's an increasingly sort of challenging question for young people to make that decision at such a young age. Now, obviously, one of the reasons I wanted to get you on the show is to talk about investing and property and how you've sort of built your portfolio over time. How did you even get into the idea of investing in the first place? What was it that triggered you to make a start with real estate?
Definitely parents, mate. We were sort of always, dinner at the family dinner table. Money was quite an open subject in our house, which I think I'm quite lucky about. I actually have quite an open filter myself with a lot of people. I'm quite honest with what we have and what we're doing and, why we're doing it. So I don't really see it as like a taboo subject, I suppose, because it was always quite open. So mum and dad almost bankrupt when they were about my age, early 30s. Dad had a poor business decision and business partner. I don't really remember. We were very, very little. But basically 3 kids, almost bankrupt, and had to start again in their early 30s. And, through his career, sort of got talking to a few of his bosses and everything, and that got him into real estate. He'd be painting and doing all sorts of things on them, and we'd be there helping. So we were there quite young watching it, always talking about it, always talking about money. And I can remember myself even being probably 13 or 14 saying, why do you want to buy a bunch of houses? Why don't you just want a lot of money in the bank account? Because, as a 12-year-old, you sort of don't understand. But I think as we came up through the teens, it was a great foundation because we could go away with Dad while he was working. And as I said, he was in supermarkets. And by that time in his career, he was talking with people about developing shopping centres and things like that. So the language that they use is very, very different. They talk about money in a very different way to the average person. And it sort of was just like a mind-blowing, wow, how do you get there? How do you do that? How do these people have so much money to be able to, keep going?
That's a really interesting insight, especially for people bringing up kids of their own. That, as you said, people in your family around the dinner table could talk about money openly. But I think, one of the key differences is that it's a positive subject matter. Certainly growing up as I did, talk about money was always framed negatively for various reasons. I mean, we were from a massive family of 7 on one salary. That would be a part of it. But I think also just the generation, we went through skyrocketing interest rates in the late 80s and early 90s, which put a lot of people with mortgages under great pressure. But yeah, I think just more generally, it wasn't a subject that was sort of discussed very openly or positively. I wrote a book some years ago about the wealth called Wealth Ways for the Young, about what should you teach kids? Because when I became a parent, I'd heard all these sort of stories about what you shouldn't do, but I wasn't quite sure, what are the steps you can do to help your kids get a head start. And probably even just a few simple measures could probably get your kids sort of ahead of 95% of people straight away, just by not getting them into things like credit card debt or consumer debt and so on. But that's probably a subject for another day. Well, tell us about your first property. That's always an interesting question. How did you get onto the ladder and where did you buy?
First property, mate, was with my now wife, then girlfriend, Moreton, just north of Brisbane. We paid $262,000 for it. It was a renovator, but I was a young chippy, so it didn't really worry me. Painted inside and out, new kitchen, new bathroom, put a carport on the side, redid the driveway, just made it a little home. We only stayed there 2 years though. We moved on pretty quick. We paid the mortgage down fairly fast because it was cheap to get into as a first home. It really gave us the benefit of being able to pay down the mortgage rather than sort of feel hamstrung by it. It was never a burden. We never sort of had to change our lifestyle that much. And then also on top of that, interest rates kept falling as we were buying. So it was good in, a way for us. We bought our second property 2 years later, our first investment.
I guess that often is a way that works out very well for people in residential property. If you can buy a place that needs a bit of value adding to it, you don't have to do it immediately. But if you can add some value over time, a bit of a refresh, a bit of a rejuvenation or repaint, and then if you can do things like kitchen and bathrooms, I always used to say in the old rule of thumb, if you can add $1.50 or $2 of value for every dollar you spend, then you won't go too far wrong with a buy and hold approach. Did you hang on to that property when you moved on to the next and started building the portfolio?
So the second one, we used the equity that we'd paid down. So it was actual cash sitting in the redraw account, and then just refunded that back out as the deposit for the investment property. So we kept that one. But when we wanted to go for the third property, the bank said no, because we actually wanted to keep that and build our own our own home. So it was a little bit tricky. Just wasn't earning a lot of money, mate. I can look back and sort of say it was probably the right decision for them. But at the same time, it was pretty annoying because we ended up selling that property. We built our new home where we currently live, and then we had that revalued probably 3 months after the completion of the build, and I asked the bank if we could buy another investment property, and they said yes. So they just made me go through a whole bunch of costs basically to swap over and get another property.
So this is an interesting concept to me. So did you have it in your head from your parents, the idea that you might build a portfolio of properties? Because I'm just thinking back or casting my mind back. I don't think I'd even heard of the concept of being a landlord and owning a property portfolio till I was way into my adulthood. Like it just wasn't a thing in my parents' social circle. It was a little bit different back in those days. In Britain, the government owned a lot of the housing. There was a lot of sort of public housing or social housing, and then you had a few sort of real big landlords who owned hundreds of properties, but they weren't really people that were mixed with. But the idea that you would, buy another property except for the one you lived in, it just wasn't a thing. I'd never even heard of the idea until I got a bit older and started reading about investing in real estate. So is that something that you had front of mind when you started out?
Yeah, definitely. For me, paying down the mortgage on that first property was always about being able to leverage the cash into another income-producing asset. As I said, property for me was, it's always been the backbone. It was always talked about at the table. For me personally, it was sort of about, because I wasn't earning a lot in my own business as a young carpenter, I just wanted to get something else that would sort of create a little bit of income for me to make life a little bit easier on the way through. So I'd always buy something that was, cash flow neutral, positive, a little bit, something that I could see the rent, it was under rented at the time as well. I think that's a really big thing if you're young, because growth is often talked about in residential property for investors. But I didn't have, I had plenty of time on my side, being, in my early 20s. So I didn't really see a problem because I can wait, 10, 20, 30 years to really get that compounding effect. But what I did have an issue with was income. So that's what I sort of wanted to pick up. I needed to increase income.
And in any case, a lot of those markets like Caboolture and Murrayfield, the past couple of years, they've done better than a lot of the big cities in any case. So I think there's a guy who used to work at Deloitte called RJ Ahuja, who built a massive property portfolio. And I know he used to say in his books, it's like, well, yeah, it's okay to focus on capital growth, but quite often, people don't predict the right areas anyway. So why not focus on making sure you get a good rental yield, because that is something you can control. Tell us a bit about the resi portfolio today. So you've obviously grown it substantially over time. What other types of property have you bought, and what kind of locations?
They're all in the Moreton Bay region, all my residential property. As you say, mate, I probably wouldn't pick, the best area around Australia at any one time. I don't really have the time to, sit down and focus on 100 different markets around the country. So I figured when I was fairly young, I may as well get really good at understanding the market where I live. So we've built the resi side of the portfolio. I think it's 10 or 11 properties now. I think one of the big things most people don't sort of understand is we did that in a marketplace that was probably doing 1% to 2% growth a year. Through that whole decade, Brisbane's basically been flat. So to be able to go that quickly, you have to be buying well as well. So you have to really understand the location and pick up. I wouldn't say that, they're under market value, as everyone sort of likes to say, but definitely there are price discrepancies in real estate, and that's something that I really enjoy about it. If you understand it really well, you can pretty much do better than what the agents are trying to sell. So
yeah, completely. Interesting point there that you bought all of the resi properties in the one location. I mentioned just before that it was very common in Britain for professional landlords to build very large portfolios, usually of cheaper properties, but they could own 200 or 300 properties in a portfolio, largely because they could structure the purchases either in companies or other structures like trusts or whatever. But in Australia, that's been comparatively rare. And I guess one of the reasons why would be the land tax. If you start building up a huge portfolio of resi properties, then the land tax eventually starts to bite. And over the past 5 or 6 years anyway, the bank's much less keen to lend large sums of money to an individual. So I guess 2 questions. One is, does that sort of bring land tax into the game for you? And also, have you reached a point where it's difficult to get lending from the bank, or is that still possible for you?
So we don't currently have any land tax bills, which is pretty cool because, as you say, we've got a few in our own names. We've got a few in some trusts, and we've got some commercial property as well in a company. So you can still split up, your entities, which helps.
Lending has just got tighter for portfolio investors over recent years, and I guess ultimately most of us reach a point where the bank is going to say, as a multiple of your income, there's only so much debt that you can carry. Now you've obviously got a successful business, which helps, but has it got harder to get the bank to lend to you, or are you tapped out?
Mate, I've tapped out pretty much every year through the journey. They always get to a point where they say no. It's just been about paying down some debt, maybe increasing the rents if you can, if the market allows it. Just being patient, waiting for your revaluations to come in a little bit higher or whatever it is. Patience is a massive thing, I think. To be honest about being tapped out at the moment, I'm not honestly 100% sure. We've just done a fairly large commercial property purchase. I don't think I could go through the hassle of speaking with the banks again for another 3 months to see if we could actually do something at the moment. So I couldn't answer you on if we're tapped out or not. I suppose it depends on the lending structure and, what type of property you're buying. But for me at the moment, residential property in my portfolio doesn't really make a lot of sense anymore. Just a standalone home. I think, there's some bigger and better things that we can move on to.
Do you want to save on buyer's agent fees? You could save thousands with Buyers Buyers. As Australia's most extensive network of buyers agents, we can lock in highly competitive prices. Plus, our national network of buyers agents are some of the best in the business. So get the Buyers Buyers advantage and talk to us today. Call 1800 975 051 or visit buyersbuyers.com.au.
One of my mottos in real estate and investing in general is just keep trying to find ways to keep moving forward. I think we were tapped out pretty much when I left my full-time career, as did my wife. It was difficult for a few years to borrow because we didn't have the business income. Sometimes you end up having to buy a cheaper property than what you might want to do because the banks won't come to the party, but you just got to keep finding ways to keep taking the next step. And sometimes it means cheaper properties. We've done the last 3 we've bought have been for cash, just because the banks won't lend any further, but you just keep finding ways to keep going, I suppose. Now, as you mentioned there, your last property purchase was a significant one, a substantial purchase, and in the commercial space. Tell us a little bit about that specific property purchase first. Then I've got a couple of questions about commercial property investing in general for you after that.
Yeah, cool. So it's a regional location. It's just south of Toowoomba in Queensland, about 45 minutes south of Toowoomba. It's a little country town supermarket. We paid, I think, $1.8 million for it. Net rent, the yield is 6.75. So net rent's about $122,000 a year. Tenant pays all the outgoings. So that's rates, water, insurances. There's also GST on top of that rent as well. So it's a different ball game dealing with the commercial side of it than residential for sure. But I think that's where we're probably going to head from now on, I'd say.
Yeah, I think it certainly makes sense if you're looking for ways to keep moving forward. In the commercial space, if you can buy somewhere with a net yield of 5, 6 or 7%, and you're borrowing at a much lower mortgage rate, obviously there's a way there that you can get the debt paid down, and sometimes pretty quickly, which is definitely one way you can keep moving forward. And if you buy well, you may well pick up the capital growth in any case. Now, obviously, you already touched on there, slightly regional location. So there's certain things that people who are looking at commercial property need to understand in terms of the market research you need to do, particularly with regards to finding a good tenant and a stable tenant that will keep paying those rents for you for a long period of time. Is there anything else that people need to think about differently when they're looking at commercial?
I mean, the name says it all, mate. It's a commercial decision. So keep your emotions out of it. It is based on numbers. It's based on how the tenant's going, if they're performing well. So I actually like the little regional supermarkets and things, because smaller towns genuinely only need sort of one supermarket to service the community. They're not big enough for somebody like a Coles, Woolies or an Aldi to come in and compete with them, so it doesn't crush the operator either. So they have a much more stable income, week to week, month to month, they can pay the rent. And they actually get quite good margins because, it's just quite a journey for people to drive to the nearest town to go to a different supermarket. So people aren't going to, skip town because, they're 50 cents dearer on a packet of chips. They're not going to drive 20 minutes round trip or half an hour round trip for the same packet of chips to try and save the 50 cents.
No, I suppose, especially the way fuel prices have been going in the past few months, I think people will be shopping locally for a long time to come. What about lending in the commercial purchase that you've done there? Do you pay a similar mortgage rate to what you might pay on a residential loan?
We do. I think it's about 2.8% at the moment. It works, it's just a variable rate, so it works very similar. We've got 2 loans set up for it, both commercial lending, so one's residential secured because it was equity release, but it is still a commercial loan. And that's sort of one of the ways we got around the debt to income servicing, was because we could roll it out and put it in a business loan. They treat the business loan very differently to just normal residential lending. If we tried to pull it out as cash, as equity, as cash, as residential secured, the bank would have just told us no, we couldn't even service the 720,000. But because we put it in business, they gave us an extra 1.8 million. So quite a significant change.
Interesting time when you can get commercial mortgages at rates like that, but in some cases on residential loans, particularly interest-only loans and investor loans, they've actually been, sometimes the rates have been significantly higher than that. So a whole sort of range of sort of general points that people make about commercial property investing, but some of them, they might be part truths, and it's worth, if you haven't listened already, did a podcast with Steve Polisi some weeks back where we talked about how to invest in commercial property and some of the ways in which it's different from residential. So, Hayden, you're only a youngster, certainly compared to me, and you've been absolutely killing it in terms of your property investment journey. And I dare say if you did nothing else from here and just coasted towards the retirement years, you'd be sitting very pretty. But what do you have planned to do next as an investor, in business, in life? Do you have plans to keep moving forward, or are you just going to relax a bit now you've built such a successful portfolio?
We'll definitely look to keep building the portfolio. We'll still run the business. Investment-wise right now, I'm not actually that sure, to be honest. Like, as I say, we've just done that fairly large purchase for us, so we'll probably pay down some debt, increase some savings and buffers and things like that, just really sort of minimise any risk involved with it. We'll probably try and pay out one of those business loans, the commercial loan as well, just for some more stability, because people often don't talk about, if your cap rate changes on your real estate, in commercial and you have, a significant borrowing against it, they can actually call for more security or ask you to sell. So, for us, it's probably about paying down that debt a little bit. But yeah, as I say, we'll definitely keep looking forward. I dare say there could be some syndicates or something like that we're involved in as well that will pop up from time to time. Might throw some cash in one of those as well, just to keep moving forward.
Yeah, I guess the great thing about being in the position you are, you can be open to what comes along, any opportunities, and free to pursue any sort of opportunities that come along. Now, I know you've done a bit of buyer's agency work. If people want to find out a bit about that, where should they go for more, and what's the name of the agency?
Mate, so I run Moreton Bay Buyers Agents. You can check us out on Facebook, or you can go to the website www.mbbagent.com.au. All my details are on there. Bit of a story about my journey as well. For people to read, there's some properties on there that we've purchased with prices and yields and things like that as well that they can check out and have a look and see what we do.
Superb. Now, I don't get I do come through Moreton Bay a little bit, but what do you think is going to happen in the markets over the next year or two? About every third email I get seems to be about why the Queensland market is immune to the downturn. It's going to keep on powering ahead. But what are you seeing locally? And do you think any sort of interest rate increases will have an impact on Moreton Bay and Toowoomba and those kind of markets?
I don't think so. Not overly. It's still really affordable. I mean, when you're looking at, the RBA cash rate at 0.35, I mean, it's almost free money. So if you've got a problem paying that, there's something wrong. Interest rates, 3 to sort of 5% on if you're buying a sort of nice 4-bedroom home from 6 to 800,000. I don't think many people will struggle with that anymore. I think they're earning plenty of money in the area. A lot of them can commute to Brisbane really easily. It's only anywhere from half an hour to 50 minutes to the Brisbane CBD for work if you're going in there. So, the lifestyle's great. Beaches, mountains, everything you sort of need around you. Yeah,
you're preaching to the converted. I've been in southeast Queensland for about, it must be nearly 8 years now up here. No plans to head back down south to Sydney anytime soon. And as you said, it's changed a little bit over the past couple of years, but certainly 3 or 4 years ago, that you could pick up some really good value stock. Those north side suburbs of Brisbane, they're pretty close, striking distance to the city. I never really came as far north as some of those markets, but even cheaper. I guess you get out into some of those markets like Moreton Bay and Loganshire to the south. And they're really sort of coming into their own. I think the pandemic has seen a huge shift of people moving away from particularly Victoria, but also New South Wales, the glorious southeast Queensland lifestyle. So and certainly the rental market has been incredibly tight.
Yeah, there's some areas, mate, in the Moreton Bay region that have a 0.3% vacancy rate. So, there literally is a huge housing crisis here for tenants. Rents are going through the roof, as you said. They really don't have an option. I've talked to quite a few tenants recently that are literally going to have to move into their car or something with, their teenage daughter or whatever, because they just cannot find another home. And they don't have family up here to live with either. They've done the shift up from Sydney. The rents have gone up in some cases, $100 to $200 over the year, and they're being forced out of their house basically. So very, very tough situation.
Very different dynamic from a decade ago when a lot of high-rise units were being built in particularly Brisbane CBD, but also other parts of southeast Queensland. But the building just hasn't kept pace, and with the big geographical or demographic shift through the past couple of years, there's suddenly a huge shortage of housing across the region. So certainly noticed that in the Sunshine Coast as well. Very, very little for rent and a huge amount of demand for it at the moment. Speaking of which, if you make it back up to Noosa anytime soon, it'd be great to grab another coffee on the Gympie Terrace. So Yeah,
Sounds good to me.
you have to send me a text if you're heading back up to the glorious sunny coast. In the meantime, thank you so much for coming on. It's been great to get an insight into how young people can really still achieve great things in the property market and business these days, despite all of the doom and gloom in the media. It's great to see people just getting on with it and getting ahead. So, Hayden, thank you so much for coming on, and hopefully catch up again soon.
Yep, sounds good, mate, and thanks for having me on.
Pleasure. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to Pete's Property Podcast, powered by Buyers Buyers. Don't forget to subscribe and join us next time as Pete chats all things property with a new guest. And just a reminder that the information provided in this podcast is general advice only and doesn't take into account your personal financial situation or needs. You should always consult a licensed professional to discuss your individual personal circumstances.